Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you, John, for joining us today for this Sea Talk. I'm Martin Whale, President of SIMRES. SIMRES, as many of you know, is the Sir Turner Island Marine Research and Education Society, a community-based non-profit organisation building awareness of marine life and ecosystems in the Salish Sea off the western coast of British Columbia in Canada. We promote scientific research in our region and support researchers in their projects. I'm delighted to be able to introduce Daniel Pauly, our speaker for today. Daniel is a highly respected fisheries biologist and a voice of reason in a deafening world of opinion about the world fisheries crisis. And his ambitious research has looked at fisheries on every scale up to global. I've been reading his book, Vanishing Fish, for a little while. I would recommend it to you. It's insightful, it's accessible. And I think Daniel and I share in common the fact that both of us went into this field perhaps because of Rachel Carson's writing, both in The Silent Spring and The Sea Around Us. So we're a small island in the Salish Sea, but we have a regional point of view, and we're interested in what happens in the world around us. And this is an issue about world oceans, which affects us all. Daniel has a true view of world fisheries, and his life and career path has led him around the world. He was born and raised in France and Switzerland, received his degree in Germany, did his master's in Ghana in Africa, worked in the fisheries in the Philippines and around Southeast Asia, and in 1994 became a professor at the UBC Fisheries Centre. One of his greatest contributions has been identifying the problem of assessing fish numbers on a shifting baseline. He's a critical expert voice of the politics, the convenient misconceptions and the overt fraud going on about how to fix our shrinking fish populations. We're delighted that Dr. Pauly would join us today to talk about his work and answer your questions about worldwide fisheries. If you put your questions in the Q&A, we will answer them at the end, and we'll go on for as long as we need to, because we've done that in previous Sea Talks and it's proved popular. Daniel, I've said far too much already. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I would like to be able to share my screen if I can. There we are. So we are talking about my book, but actually I will not obviously give you a summary of the book, but I will give you some ideas that were in there, and not for you to buy the book, but for you to know basic problems that beset our fisheries. And we start at the beginning, when human became anatomically modern humans. And this was about 350,000 years ago. And what made it possible for us to become modern humans is probably language that allowed us to cooperate and in bigger and bigger groups, and to develop a symbolic thinking that allowed us to defend ourselves. So we became efficient predators instead of being prey when we were really part of the ecosystem. And this becoming efficient predator was actually our first major characteristic when we burst out of Africa about 70,000 years ago into what is now India and Asia, and into Europe, and into the Americas later, and into Australia, into very late into New Zealand, Madagascar. And in each of these areas, we killed enormous number of species, especially large ones. The numbers that you see on top of on the mammoth and the rhinoceros and so on are number of genera. The number of species is much bigger, and it's only in Africa that that the number of genera that were certainly wiped out by humans was low, because the animals were not naive. They knew that bipedal apes with pointy sticks are dangerous. Everywhere else, the animals were largely naive, and they could be wiped out, and they were in a very strong way. The development of agriculture also led to the disappearance of lots of species. But I will now make a big jump. For the next thing, the next expansion, for the big expansion that began in England, in the Midland, that is the industrialization, the use of fossil energy and to produce steel, to produce machinery with which more fossil energy could be dug up. And this fossil energy revolutionized everything. And now this mode of operation has conquered the world. And the major producer of steel is, for example, is China. You can ask yourself, what's the point here? Well, the point is that this allowed construction and deployment of the first steam trawlers that relied on fossil energy. And fossil energy allows you to punch into ecosystem in a way that humans could not before. Humans could use sail and rowing. That's all they could do. And largely, the gear that we use didn't move much. We use traps and nets, and it's the fish movement that catch them. In the case of trawlers, this is the movement of the boat, that of the net, that enables the fish to be caught. So that requires lots of energy, but this energy is supplied by fossil energy, which has accumulated over millions of years. So that is novel, this is completely new, and it caused the stocks around the British Isles to be depleted within 10 years, 10, 15 years, and the accumulation of big fish around the British Isles were wiped out. What happened then is these trawlers and their successor, steam trawlers and so on, where diesel trawlers and so on, were forced to move out into the open North Sea, into the open Celtic Sea, and so on, until they had to move into the open North Atlantic, all the way to Iceland, where the Brits fought a war in the 60s, in 1960, with the Icelanders about who should access the fish around Iceland. And now, around the British Isles, we have about 5% of the fish that we had before, about 5%. And obviously the catch is then much lower, and the seafood supply is important. That is the case in most industrialized countries, and it is the case in Canada also, which has turned from a net fish exporter to a net fish importer. Now, this expansion that was required because of the overwhelming power of trawlers, can be tracked, can be documented in time by looking at as a measure at the primary production that is used by the catch, that is embodied in the catch. The primary production, as you know, is the plankton that is in the sea. It's like the grass of the sea. And this grass of the sea is consumed by smaller zooplankton, small antelope and goats and cows. And then it's consumed by one level higher, that's mainly small fish. They correspond to lions and leopard and so on. And the next level is the big fish, which then correspond to dragons and dragon-eating lion, right? So when you know the catch that is made in these waters, you can calculate how much of the plankton that is there, that is produced, is consumed, is embodied in the catch. And we know the plankton production from satellite oceanography, where we have the plankton productivity is mapped throughout the world. So you see in the 50s that basically only around industrialized countries in East Asia and the North Atlantic, where was a significant part of the coast using up 20% or of the primary production, or less than 20% actually. Now, in the 80s, you can see that this has expanded both in the core areas and in other areas, which was the expansion of fishing. And I, as I was a student, I participated in this expansion of fishing because I was working for the German government in Indonesia, and we introduced trawling in Indonesia. And I participated in surveys in the Java Sea in Indonesia to introduce trawling. And a few years after our surveys, which did find fish, a monstrosity of trawlers development took place. And this monstrosity is now shown here. Basically, we use the sea with almost the same intensity as we use the primary productivity on land. On land, we use about half of the primary production of the plant production. Well, in the sea, we use a huge fraction as well. And it is astounding because we are not a land-based, we are a land-based animal, but the conquest of the sea has brought us to that situation. And the only zone where we don't fish much, in spite of a large primary production, is the Antarctic zone. And this is just beginning with the exploitation of krill by Japan and Norway to feed their salmon. We also fish deeper. When I was a student in Germany, I came with a big German trawler in Labrador and Newfoundland, and in the Baffin Bay, and we were fishing cod at 1 kilometer of depth, and we were lifting the cod and rocks, glacial rocks that were the size of Volkswagen. The boat was immense, and you can see that with time we are fishing at incredible depths. So this expansion is driven by a massive expansion of fishing effort. You can calculate the fishing effort different ways, and here we calculated it by adding up all the engine power of all of the fleet of the world. And you can see that the Asian fleets are now dominating. Until the 80s, European fleet that were fishing in Europe and fishing in other parts of the world were dominant, and Asia, that is mainly China, but also Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, are now dominating by far the world ocean. And the other continents don't play a role. They are being fished in. They are not fishing out. So what is driving this expansion? This expansion is largely driven by subsidies, because these giant boats that are fishing everywhere, they are encountering fish stocks that have declined, and they could not operate profitably if they didn't have massive subsidies by government. And these subsidies encourage a devastating vicious circle where the subsidy maintain too many boats, which cause too few fish to be left, and you then, in order to catch them, you have to scrape the bottom of the sea, and in the process you're destroying the ocean environment, and you have to go further and further away, which requires more and more subsidies. So basically you have that, and the subsidies that we calculated for the world is about $35 billion every year, and that is 1/3 about of the gross value of the landed value of the fish. The numbers that we produced, which were the first valid for the world as a whole, as opposed to national studies or regional studies, were adopted by the World Bank and by the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is presently negotiating on how to stop this subsidization. The big subsidizers are the European Union and the Russia and China. Japan and Korea and Taiwan are also big subsidizer, and together they maintain these subsidies maintain giant fleet that we don't need really, because we have too many boats chasing too few fish. Now we have a problem with the world fisheries catch, in that we don't really know how much is being caught in the world. And that is because there is one agency, the global agency, that is the Food and Agriculture of the United Nations, that collects catch statistics and collects and harmonize them and make them available to the world. But it collects the data that the member countries give, and the member countries report they catch, which is, however, not complete. So we have to add all the stuff that is not reported to get a complete picture of what is caught and of the diversity of fisheries in the world. And I will show you some example of this reconstruction project that we did and do over. It involved about 400 people working for 15 years, and this was orchestrated from here, and it led to many to a database that you can see on the website. It's called Sea Around Us, where you can see for every country in the world the reconstruction work. So the reconstruction was done for EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone, the 200-mile from the shore that every country has, that it can use exclusively. If other countries want to fish in there, they have to pay and they have to get permission and pay. Since that is according to the law of the sea, since '82, the law of the sea was ratified then. And you can see in the little map here, that we see that the pink area is the area of 50 kilometers offshore or 200 meters depth, whichever comes first. That is to define the area where you're likely to have small-scale fisheries. Small-scale fisheries, that is artisanal, subsistence, or recreation fisheries. And for BC, here's the catch. And you can see the catch is was mainly herring. It was overfished, and then we have hake that is fished in part by foreign fishermen, and you have a number of other fish that you can get details about. What we also provide below a scale of reliability, how reliable this stuff is, and the black line that you see superposed on the catch series is the reported catch. The additional catch is what we have added by looking at fisheries that were not taken into account. For example, the First Nation fisheries and sports fishery, recreational fisheries. But in Canada, we have a largely reliable account of the catches, or rather in BC. Because in Canada, in Arctic Canada, we have a situation where the Inuit, which fish in coastal area, I'm talking about marine fish only, no freshwater, are simply not reported. In the catch statistics of FAO, you find 0 catches from this region, while in fact there is a catch, and it's quite substantial, at least given the condition there. And it is a catch that is made by was made by Inuit, and it was very big in the 60s because they caught fish in addition to their own consumption. They caught fish to feed their sled dogs, and then the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came and killed all the sled dogs because the policy at the time was to force the Inuit to move into modern settlement, and as with the running water mainly from the roof. For other countries, you see the reconstruction has, for example, the Bahamas give a very strange picture, because the official catch, the reported catch, is still the black line, is much lower than the actual catch. In this case, you can see where the Bahamas are. It's very close to southern Florida, with all the people in Miami that have boats and can go to the Bahamas to fish, and they get a license and a bag limit, and they fish their bag limit, and it's not considered part of the catch in the Bahamas. So if you add this catch, you get the picture that is presented here. And if you consider all the catch that are not reported in a similar fashion for all countries of the world, you get a reconstructed catch that is much higher than reported catch. So the reported catch officially is between 80 and about 80 million tons a year. And the reported catch, the actual catch, is 120 millions a year. It's a difference of 50%. That is a small difference for developed countries usually, and a big difference for developing countries, which have statistic systems that are not working very well. But what is important is that both of these trend lines show a maximum in 96. In other words, since 96, the catch of the world declines. And this was published a few years ago, and it hasn't changed. It continues to decline and stay low in spite of increasing fishing effort. So this means that we have less and less fish in the sea, because given an increasing fishing effort, you should catch more. So the result of all this fishing is that there is a fishing down phenomenon, and this is a thing that I wrote in Science in '98, and it was contested for a while by different people. But essentially, this is a phenomenon where you have at the beginning of the industrial fishing, you have lots of old fish, big fish, and then you fish them out, and then you end up with fishing small, very small things, and you could add a few jellyfish at the tip of the arrow, because that's what you get in your water. At the same time, because the trawling destroys habitat, you have the bottom gets the bottom of the shells, that is, of the water that has most of the effort. The bottom gets laminated, all these animals are wiped out, and you end up with mud flats. And this one effect of this overfishing is also the destruction of traditional stocks. And not only is this happening, but people don't remember that it has happened because of shifted baseline that are discussed in the book. The paper that present the concept of shifting baseline is reproduced in the book. It is actually a one-pager. It was a one-pager in the journal, and it's two-page in the book. It simply says that as you get in your lifetime, the changes that have occurred count much more than the changes that have happened before. So you tend to concentrate only on the things that have happened only recently. Now, cod was at the base of the formation of the country of Canada, and it began in 1500. We have a time series that began in 1508, and the catch were small, about 100,000 tons for a long time, and then gradually moving to 200,000 tons until the 1950. And then trawlers came. You remember the monster that I have shown you, and the catch increased like insane beyond 700,000 tons. That is, it was only for a short time, but it was enough to bring in B, you can see in graph B, the Bahamas, which had always been above about 1.5 million tons to 2 million tons, to bring it down rapidly to half a million tons, and then further down. And if you now look at C, you can that starts in 1940 or in the 30s. You can see the people who lived in that time. They had already perceived. They could already perceive only a diminished abundance because the stock had declined to a tremendous amount. And now we have young people that, for example, my students, who have never known the cod to be more than just a few 10,000 tons, and they have never known cod being an abundant fish, and they tend to believe that it was not an abundant fish. In other words, they tend to disbelieve that it was as abundant as it was, and so they don't want to make an effort to re-establish this bounty that we had, this immense wealth. And that is happening on a global basis everywhere. So you had an immense bounty before, but you massacred it, you reduce it to almost nothing, and then this almost nothing, you try to maintain it. People talk about sustaining the cod in Canada, but the issue is not sustaining it, it's rebuilding it. And so the discussion about sustainability in cod are completely besides the point, because they talk about sustaining a population that is minuscule compared to what it could be. Now, at the end of the arrow, of the fishing down arrow, that's what you get. That is something that comes from China. About half of their catch the catch of their trawlers cannot be consumed by humans, or should not, and that stuff goes into aquaculture. Now, people think that is okay because you have these small fish and you produce aquaculture and big fish and everybody's happy. Actually, in if this fish were allowed to grow, in part, these are tiny fish that could become bigger. They could produce much more than aquaculture would, and you wouldn't have to do anything about it. All you need is to catch them when they're big. So China loses that, even though if it looks at its aquaculture industry alone, they think that they win, but they don't. And in the process of overfishing, we also do a real number on marine mammals. That began obviously much earlier with the whales and so on, and there we can see a change that began in the 80s, that many marine mammal population are beginning to recover, and so they are, and particularly in Canada again, big trend toward getting rid of marine mammals also here, because they are the cause for the problem. I think the cause of the problem is not the marine mammal, it's humans, but then that is me. And for birds, the situation is very similar here. The scales start in the 50s. We are losing seabirds throughout the world, and that is because we are competing with them. We are catching the fish that they need, that they eat, or catching the fish that hunt with them. Tuna, for example, chase small fish close to the surface where they can be eaten, or they can be caught by seabirds that plunge in the water. But if the tuna aren't there, the seabirds cannot access the small fish, and the population declines. So I think I'm done, because I have presented some of the major issues that are presented in the book, and I was told that I had about 20 minutes. And the lessons, you can have a number of lessons, but the major problem is that we should not subsidize industrial fisheries. If they cannot make money on their own, then it is likely that the stocks that they rely on is overexploited. That is always the case. The rebuilding of stocks can be done and should be done. In the US, they have legislation that every stock has to be rebuilt within 10 years, and setting the quota that allows it to rebuild within 10 years to the level that enables maximum sustainable yield to be obtained. We don't have such legislation, or rather, we have such legislation, and then the DFO is dragging its feet to come up with plans and, in effect, undoing making the legislation inoperative. And what we also need is to protect marine biodiversity to maintain marine mammals, birds, and other biodiversity. And it also helps with ocean warming, but I don't have the time to talk about this. Thank you very much. So I am available to talk with you, respond to your questions. Since you have my email, you can also write me and I will send you papers and respond to your question individually.
Thank you, Daniel, for an excellent talk. I really enjoyed it. We've already got questions coming in. So without any further ado, we'll go straight in. From David Osborne, what do you think about salmon farms?
Well, salmon farm, I have indirectly mentioned salmon farm when I talk about the Chinese fisheries. Basically, the transformation of fish into fish feed and its transformation into salmon is not adding fish for humans to eat. It is declining the amount of fish that we have. So we have to look at aquaculture as two different sectors. One sector provides a net addition of seafood, and that's the animals that we farm that feed themselves, bivalves and clams and mussels and so on. And also in freshwater, the fish that are herbivores, they can feed much of humanity. Aquaculture can do that, and much of aquaculture in the world, especially in Asia, is like that. 2/3 of aquaculture is herbivores and freshwater fish. But in the West, and including Canada, aquaculture has become a thing. We think only of salmon. Aquaculture is equal to salmon, and salmon is equal to aquaculture, which is very wrong. But that form of aquaculture is not a solution to any of our problem, because that form of aquaculture requires feed that comes from industrial fishing. And without the Norwegian aquaculture, the one that we have here, the one in Chile, for salmon, they would not exist without fishery for anchovies or sardine and so on, which turn them into fish food. So aquaculture is polluting. This form of aquaculture is polluting. It's a mess, and it doesn't add to anything that humanity needs. It's like Ferraris. You know, you cannot solve the problem of public transport with a bunch of Ferraris. Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is about salmon and herring fisheries on the west coast of Canada. Two parts of it. The first is, what damage have we done to those fisheries? And the second is, to what extent are we actually subsidizing fishing in Canada? That's from Rob Bars. Thank you.
Yeah. So the damage of fisheries. If you compare the Fraser with the Columbia River, we have actually not done that much damage to the salmon fishery by putting dams and everywhere. But the salmon are suffering in BC, as they are throughout much of their range, and it's not clear what it is, or at least it was not clear what it is. But now we know that whatever it was that has caused the steady decline of salmon on the west coast, global warming is now added to the problem. And the Sokai that want to enter Fraser River, for example, encounter water that is too warm. They mill around, and that is too warm. And because they cannot get the oxygen in their gill when that they need, when the temperature is too high. So they have to wait and so on. So that is causing salmon all along the West Coast to be challenged. And the challenge is such that in California, they are essentially extirpated. In Oregon and Washington, they are on their way out. Here, they hang on, and they are doing well only in Alaska. And global warming will actually push them further north. And in Arctic Canada, you have new runs of salmon. So we cannot expect that things will become better with salmon. With herring, it's a slightly different story. What has happened in the Salish Sea is in the 50s and 60s, what has been fished out are the stocklets that were in each bay, in each gulf had its own stocklets. And these have been wiped out. And what is left is only one stock that is the last one. And we are busy. We are busy overfishing it, and it's very sad because this fish, because it spawns on kelp, it produces something that we can have. It's a case of eating your cake and still having it, right? We can get the spawn on kelp, and we have our cake and eat it too. We should actually maintain that fisheries as a spawn on kelp fishery. But no, we have to have industrial fisheries on the spawners, and obviously it will be wiped out. This is only a question of time.
Thank you. We've also got a bunch of questions, almost inevitably, about what sort of fish should people eat? Should people stop eating fish? Should people stop eating canned fish? We'd welcome your comments, please.
That's a difficult one. There was this horrible film, Seaspiracy, that lots of people have seen on Netflix, that advocated turning vegan, not eating any fish, as a solution to fisheries problem. But fisheries problem are solvable. They are not so-called wicked problem. They are, if you get rid of subsidies, your fishery will be okay. If you implement your legislation, your fishery will be okay. If you rebuild the stocks, it will be okay. There is no need to be as drastic as suggested there to have decent fisheries. It is not a wicked problem. It is only that we cannot solve the fisheries problem by coddling the industrial fishing that is done, of which too much is done. So in BC, we have to reduce this industrial fishing to the extent that we have enough and not more. And that is a political issue. It's not an ethical issue. It's not a wicked problem like global warming. It is a problem that an efficient government can actually solve. Where does our eating fish fit in there? Well, obviously, if all people in North America, Canada, and US, we want to eat only fish, the world would not be sufficient for that. And in fact, the taste for fish that has developed among Anglos in Canada and the US is a challenge, because this fish has to be imported. Canada doesn't produce enough, and the US don't either. So yes, our consumption patterns exceed the productive capacity of the sea here. But that's true for everything that we do, whether for the clothes that we wear, for the fuel that we use in our car and everything. So we have a societal problem that our consumption and perhaps our numbers are in excess of the productive capacity of the world we live in. This is not specifically a fisheries problem. And obviously you can eat no fish, but you will continue. We are eating up the earth, and so whether we eat less fish or whether we eat less meat, whether we drive less, all of these are solution, and no solution, because actually what we need is political action. Is not a personal thing that doesn't translate in political action.
Thank you. Another one of the questions is about large international trawlers in Canadian waters. Are there limits on them, or should we place limits on them?
We have large international trawlers in BC, and the DFO tells us that they don't catch more than X, and that's fine. And basically have problem with trawlers because they modify the habitat. They modify habitat, and so in my world, my understanding of it is that if you modify habitat, things cannot be sustainable. So, but the DFO has problem accepting that notion, and that is almost a philosophical problem, because people talk about sustainable development, and we well know that everything that grows cannot be sustained either. So we allow words and memes that don't make sense. The sustainable trawling is a contradiction in terms. So I don't know. They don't belong in our waters, these boats. They don't belong to exist, but they are, like many things that we don't like.
Thank you. Okay. We've got another one, which is, how do we stop the Wild West mentality of so many countries systematically fishing beyond the 200-mile limit worldwide?
Well, the high seas, as defined by the law of the sea, actually produce less than 10% of the fish that that is caught. The high seas are not important. The fisheries of the world are happening inside the exclusive economic zone, not in the high seas. What characterizes high sea fisheries is they are heavily subsidized because they are far away, and they are heavily criminalized, not criminalized, infested by crime because they are far away. And so basically, because there is not much fish, and because the cost of going there is so expensive, only a few countries do it. Thailand, China, Spain, a few countries, an Asian country as well. And basically, they want to reduce their cost at any cost. And so they employ slaves, they smuggle all kind of stuff and people, and they can do that because they are far away. And the solution to this, as crazy as it sounds, which is to not have fishing in the high seas. And you would say, but if we don't fish in the high sea, what are we going to do with the fish? We lose fish. Actually, in the high seas, we catch mainly tuna. And tuna migrate in and out of exclusive economic zones. High seas, no high sea. High sea, no high sea. It would be, if they were caught only in exclusive economic zones, the same amount could be caught much cheaper, and it could be caught under control of national legislation, and it would be distributed evenly among hundreds of countries, at least among 100 countries, where at present only 10 countries fish in the high seas. So it would be a solution, and it could be easily monitored with satellite, because we know every boat that is available. And the proposal to close the fisheries in the high seas, as absurd as it sounds, are discussed, and they are discussed in the UN. And it is not impossible that in 10 years or so, the high sea fishery will be closed.
Thank you. A couple of other questions about the West Coast. One of them is, how much are we subsidizing fishing on the West Coast? And then the second is, how do we influence DFO, or what's going to make DFO take the right decisions for the West Coast?
So the first thing, the subsidies. My colleague Rashid Soumala maintains a database of subsidies for every country, and I cannot do it now. But if you go to seaaroundus.org, one word, seaaroundus.org, and you look for, you go to EZ, you look the West Coast, and you look at subsidies down there, and you click, and you will see beneficial subsidies, capacity enhancing subsidies, and so on. I don't have the numbers in my head right now, the subsidy, but we have it. And this colleague of mine is Rashid Soumala. He will answer detailed question. He will send papers to anybody who asks him, and you can ask me, I can pass it on. The point is that he's the major world, the best recognized scientist working on subsidies, on fishery subsidies in the world, and he advised the WTO. And so the subsidies question, some subsidies are very subtle, and some subsidies are good. For example, safety at sea is a good subsidy, management is a good subsidy. But I don't know exactly, fuel subsidy is a bad thing because they encourage more fishing, but I don't know exactly how much subsidies are given in Canada. Therefore, to me, is a dilemma. It behaves as if it were an occupying force from another country. That's how. Maybe that country is Ottawa land. The way DFO managed to block everything that comes from the citizenry amazes me, and the way DFO failed to respond to international initiatives or international movements amazes me. I was one time in Rome at the Committee on Fisheries meeting that every 2 years the FAO collect all the member states send a delegation, and the FAO had drafted a convention to help small-scale fishermen, and it was under the Harper government, I must say. But Canada was the only country that was objecting to it, and the Canadian foreign affairs person had been instructed by DFO to object to something that was a non-binding declaration that we support and small-scale fishermen. And the reason that the Canadian delegation gave is that such thing is unnecessary because Canada is already doing all it can, or all good thing for the small-scale fishers. So Canada was going to block everything that the world wanted to do. And that was therefore instructing the Foreign Affairs Department. Finally, the Canadian delegation relented, and the monster objection was added as a footnote. But it was insane. I was asking myself, what the hell? Canada is still doing that? You would expect that from Russia, or China. No, it was Canada objecting to something perfectly innocent. It was awful. So I don't know what blocks what I don't know. I don't know. It has, for example, they have presided over the collapse of the cod, and they have not fired anybody. They kept saying it's not us, it's the seals, it's cold water, it's obviously it is DFO that mismanaged the cod, and they ruined an entire province with 40,000 people out of a job, but they continue to be unchallenged. To me, it's a complete enigma how that can be.
And a related question to that is, what can an individual do to try and get our politicians pointing in the right direction?
I guess one person can do nothing and everything. If you see Mandela, or if you see Greta Thunberg, well, it's one person, right? But if one person does something, it is always because that person inspire other, and is inspired by others. And what I would say, and I do say to my student, is join some group that is pushing somewhere. And it doesn't have to be a big one, like this WWF or something, or it doesn't have to be a big one in like David Suzuki Foundation. But you can always, there is always some group that is pushing, and in the process of pushing for better stream rehabilitation, for a local run of salmon, or ceasing to pollute something, you learn how to interact with the government. And we have a democratic government, so it may be responding. So we have to do that. And there are things that have happened that we were absolutely hopeless, that looked absolutely hopeless. For example, getting rid of smoking in public places, in enclosed public places. It looked absolutely hopeless at the time, and yet it was there is no more smoking, right, in public places. And so we can do things, but we cannot do things simply by virtue displaying. And lots of young people nowadays they think that things can change by displaying virtue, by being holier than thou, by for example, being vegetarian or vegan or whatever. This is all virtue displaying. What are you doing that actually has an impact on other people? That is the point. So stop virtue displaying, that we should do the right thing for our own sanity, but we should not expect that our virtue display is going to change anything. What changes something is people acting as a group.
Thank you. One interesting question from Abby Schwartz, and it's a long question, so I'm going to cut it down a little bit, but it makes the observation that indigenous groups have used hemlock boughs to encourage herring to spawn and lay their eggs on hemlock boughs, and whether you have any comment on that, because it leaves the fish free to leave after they've spawned.
Well, I mentioned that before. We have the only cake in the world that you can have and eat too. It's the only fish in the world that spawns on things that you can gather and the fish goes away and will spawn another time. And that is wonderful because this spawn on kelp, you can eat it or you can export it to Japan and make lots of money. Now, that is, if there is something fishy that resembles a goose that lay golden eggs, that is that, right? A fish that spawns, it continues to spawn, it doesn't die, and it leaves us a product that we can eat or export. And what do we do with it? We kill it. We kill them. We allow a fishery that is completely insane that goes after the eggs, but actually kills the fish that lays the egg. Why? And actually, the fish is turned into fish meal or it's thrown away. The fish is exploited only for the egg, but the eggs is much better when it's deposited on kelp or on some other material. So to me, this is insane, and it is part of the insanity that characterizes our world.
One other question. Are there any good examples where governments have successfully removed subsidies? Is there an exemplar?
Yeah. Australia brags about it, and they have removed much of them, but not all of them, because they are always hidden. But they are usually hidden. But subsidies do not characterize Australian fisheries. The US also has removed lots of subsidies. So yes, there are countries that have succeeded in removing the bulk of the subsidies. If you dig deep, you will find some, but it can be done. It can be done, and in fact, the most blatant subsidies, and France is an example of one that has subsidies coming out of their ear. It is possible that this round at the WTO will succeed. In fact, the new WTO General Secretary, an African woman, has made it her main goal for this year. So it could be. And the funny thing is that China would probably go along because this fleet that they have all over the place is a solution. It's also a problem for them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And have those fed through into any recovery of fish stocks or slowed the decline even?
That is difficult to say, right? But it has brought certainly profit back into the fishery. Australian fisheries are they must be managed so that money is made, and if no money can be made in a fishery, it must be closed, and that is the case, that they make money in a fishery. But the best example of recovery of stock recovery are Norway and the US. And Norway, I know that they are very pragmatic and they have rebuilt stocks, but the US is a better example because they have done it through a legislation, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which requires a stock, once the scientists have assessed it as overfished, to not get quota that would prevent it from rebuilding to acceptable level within 10 years. Now, that is without ministerial influence. The minister or the Secretary of Commerce in that case cannot intervene or does not intervene and say, well, I want this flounder to be fished. I want the quota to be that high. But in Canada, we have that, this ministerial interference. It would be like the Minister of Justice intervening in a trial actually. It's that bad, right? Uh, and 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 so we have this ministerial interference all the time, and the legislation that has been passed in Canada two years ago is similar to the Magnuson-Stevens Act, but it has left intact two pillars of no change. Ministerial interference is still allowed, and a DFO is not forced to come up with rebuilding plan. So the DFO has one rebuilding plan and other rebuilding plan. I think they have eight 400 stocks that are in bad shape, and so the rebuilding plan are also inadequate. They're also a joke, and you cannot sue them. In the US, if the rebuilding plan is not appropriate, you can sue the hell out of them. So this example, usually we jump on the US. They do the they do the horrible things, but they have resolved that problem of rebuilding, which we haven't. And Europe has not either, because the scientists propose a building plan, and the ministerial conference screw them every time.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions that keeps coming back is, how do we eat fish responsibly?
Well, how can I say that? Well, I get my fish from Skipper Otto. This is a community-based fishery that doesn't. It's one of the few fisheries that doesn't belong to Jim Patterson, and we give $200-300 at the beginning of the season, and then Skipper Otto gives us the fish that has been caught a few months later. And this is the only community-based fishery that I know of in the West Coast, and I would recommend that to everybody. But the problem that they have is that they cannot access piers, they cannot access warehouse, cool houses and stuff, because the big guys doesn't like that. I think also the Ocean-Wise program of the Vancouver Aquarium is reasonable, but we should not fool ourselves. The point is that in Canada, in the West Coast, probably as well, we are net importers of fish, not net producers. So we are going to eat fish that has been fished in developing countries that could perhaps use the stuff better than us. When I go to Granville Island, there is, to the fish market there, except for salmon and oysters, everything is imported. Everything is imported. And so mackerel from Norway and some fish from New Zealand and so on. And lots of fish is imported from nobody knows where. And because the fish that is caught internationally get mixed, so you don't really know where it comes from. And so it is extremely difficult to say, if you eat this fish, you're fine, you're an upstanding citizen. And basically, I guess the Marine Stewardship Council, you might know about it, is labeling organization, has labeled all the salmon caught in BC to be sustainably caught. So there we are. I think it's greenwashing, because they took this decision at a time where the Cohen Commission was investigating why the heck the salmon in BC go down the tube. So it's not a credible decision. So I'm sorry, I cannot answer this question. Obviously, you shouldn't eat the paws of the last panda. There is, but I don't know which fish you should eat, because the labels, the dolphin free and so on, of the Marine Stewardship Council and stuff, they are not really dealing with sustainable fishing, because for example, they certify, most of the fisheries they certified are trawl fisheries, and trawl fisheries cannot be sustainable. So I don't know. I go to Skipper Otto, or my wife does, and we get decent fish that I don't have to think about. You know, there is also another problem. When I go buy some electronic stuff, I don't have to think about did it fall off a truck? Has it been stolen? Because I'm not a detective. I cannot. The government is in charge of checking that what is it called? People who sell stolen goods, fence. That stuff doesn't get fenced. And in a sense, with regard to fish, we are supposed to be detective, right? We're supposed to make sure that it is not fenced, that it has not been stolen everywhere. And that is not realistic. It's not realistic to expect. I'm a professor of fisheries, and I don't know. How can regular folks, that is no professor of fisheries, know what is sustainable and not be cheated and be taken advantage of? We have to trust our government, and we have to be able to trust the government, and therefore the solution is that we have policies, government policies that are good, that are okay. It's not a decision that people should have to take.
A couple of questions. The last couple of questions, I think, because we need to wind this up. One of them is about the future of shrimp fishing, and then the other is about spot prawns, which may be related, and whether overfishing is damaging them.
I have a colleague actually in our house. The lower level is inhabited by a colleague called Carl Waters, and he goes out to smoke out his house and gives monologues, if you want to hear. And one of them is that the shrimp fishery is being regulated out of existence. I don't know if it's true. The shrimp fishery implies, because the shrimp are never abundant, they always imply that you catch lots of fish, lots of stuff, in addition to the fish. And this is probably why they are being forced to limit themselves to a smaller and smaller area. Another problem with trawling in BC is that there's these glass sponges that have to be protected, right? And so there are different attitudes. There are people who think that we should fish the shrimp everywhere we can and screw the glass sponges. And then there are people who say that it's nice to have glass sponges. We don't need the shrimp. And yeah, it's one of these questions. I tend to think that we don't need the shrimp. And every time I see one of these ads that says eat all the shrimp you can, or all you can shrimp evening, in red shrimp or red lobster or something, eat all you can. This is disgusting. We should not eat all the shrimp we can and annihilate glass sponges in order to do that.
Okay. Dr. Pauly, thank you very much. This has been an excellent afternoon and has raised lots of thoughts. And thank you very much for joining us.
It ended with, I don't know about what foot prawn. I'm sorry, man.
No, that's fine. I'm sure that this discussion will continue to rumble, and you may get the occasional email. Thank you very much.